We welcome Ramona Schindelheim and her talented panel of finance experts to the stage. She'll be joined by Marcus Felder, Rodney Bolden, and Roti Balogun.
Hello, everybody. We're the only thing between you and a break, okay? So pay attention, ask questions. No, thank you very much for being here, and I really want to thank my talented group of very smart people who have agreed to help me through this as well. I am a reporter, a journalist. I'm at WorkingNation, editor-in-chief, and we report on people like you in this room. This is our goal, our mission, is to tell the stories of economic mobility. So you learn from each other, but also people out in your community can find out where the opportunities are. And we've heard a lot today about, and I saw this on one of the placards, thriving employees equal return on investment. So this is a very good, not only is it good for people, but it's a good business strategy. So that's what we'd like to explore here. I want to start with you, Rodney, because one of the things that I learned in our conversation is it's not just optional. There's a compliance issue of this. People have to share it. But it's a little vague on what that actually is, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So the Securities and Exchange Commission amended Regulation SK, which is the quarterly and annual reporting requirement for public companies. And it now says that companies have to report material human capital information. But what's material? They didn't define that. They're leaving it up to the company. And really what it grew out of is social impact investing. As more investors were interested in hearing what companies were doing with ESG and corporate social responsibility, that is what drove that new amendment. However, even in this current environment that we're in politically, where some companies are lessening that reporting, investors and analysts still see value in human capital reporting because of everything that was talked about today. And just the quote that you said, if you have a thriving workforce, it actually is profitable. Companies that have higher employee engagement, companies that have higher overall well-being are actually more profitable. So investors want to know.
So it's good for investments, it's good for customers, attracting customers, and it is good for attracting and retaining employees, especially at a time now when employers are saying, we're having trouble finding these people. So how do you measure it? I will pass it down, maybe Marcus or Roti. How are you measuring it so you can share it with these three different groups?
Yeah, so.
Oh.
Okay, let's switch it. Thank you. Happy to be here. Thank you for the question. So I'm at Blackstone, the world's largest alternative asset manager with $1.2 trillion in assets under management, 230 portfolio companies, about 700,000 employees across those companies. I have the great pleasure to work with a subset of those companies, about 70 or so at this point. With the program that I designed, I was recruited to Blackstone to lead called Career Pathways. We are situated within our, what we're called now operating team, Blackstone operating team, or a group of operators who are deployed to the portfolio companies to help them realize the value creation plan that is created by our deal teams. And so I'm on a talent team within that. And so, long-winded way of getting back to your question, Ramona, about how do you measure that. Something that I realized, I come from the higher education nonprofit world, jumped into corporate world at Blackstone, and realized that my way of telling a story or communicating impact in my previous life was not going to carry the same weight that in the corporate life in front of John Gray, our president and COO. And so I had to figure out, how do we measure the work that we're doing around skills-based practices, around widening the aperture for people from alternative routes to employment, all those things. What does that look like? So my team and I had to develop a framework impact measurement framework that actually leveraged great work by Grads of Life to really think about how do you try to correlate some of the practice adoption to what we're now seeing in terms of the bottom line. And so we had to work with our companies to figure out, okay, what data do you have that you collect around your people? How do we then put that into a framework? We work with PwC to kind of think through that. And then how does that get us to a dollar amount? And so a quick example is an ed tech software company was really focusing on internal mobility. And so they enacted a program. We said, hey, this is a great opportunity for us to test out this framework. So they collected all the inputs. We did the analysis, and it showed that it saved them over $1 million in terms of their recruitment costs because they were able to find opportunities for folks internally to move around the organization. So their recruitment costs went down, their internal mobility costs were impacted. So that's how we've been able to try to correlate, again, the connection between practice adoption and thinking about how does that impact the bottom line, and then communicate that to not only Blackstone stakeholders, but our LPs and others that are curious about that work.
And Roti, it's not just one person doing this, right? You have to develop this framework that will bring in your other managers to help them be able to help the talent and then bring out those little, I want to say data points, but they're also stories.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Roti Balogun, I'm the founder of Work Experience Scheme Online. It's a sort of education to employment marketplace. And prior to that, I was the Chief Talent Officer of JP Morgan Chase, General Electric over the past couple of years. So as a finance service expert, and to the point you made, I think the thought on sort of return on investment and how we measure it, I'd like to bring it down to a basic level on people managers, right? And I think the business goal around, from a bank perspective, was really on when we think about customer trust, when we think about operational integrity, when we think about, frontline agility. This all ties down to the quality of the people managers that we had. I had the privilege of sort of helping to guide about 15,000 managers at my previous employ. And one of the key questions that we asked ourselves was, what does an effective manager actually look like? There were different sort of definitions of effective managers, and the ones that were not too effective, what were we doing? What were we putting in place to support them, to develop them? And so, I paused and thought, all right, what was the first thing that we needed to do was have a definition. What are the manager expectations? What are the capabilities that these managers need to have? And then just look at the insight that we actually had at our fingertips. So everyone does annual engagement surveys, right? We probably have manager effectiveness scores. We particularly actually did very regular pulse surveys in addition to those annual engagement surveys. But you can't stop and look at the data at that point. I think that's where we had to think about broader data triangulation as well. Those sort of managers, do they have great performance scores at the end of the year, right? Depending on how you're measuring performance. When you looked at sort of turnover and attrition in those management teams, what were the numbers that we were looking at for that? And so when we came to that definition of what an effective manager was and one that wasn't too effective, it was then what were the intentional development programs that we had to put in place to enable them. The outcome of that whole process was really then triangulating the outcomes of the development programs on a very focused target group of managers on the return on investment, what branches were performing that they were managing, right? What's the customer retention there? And of course, you can start to tie that to things like NPS and deposit share as well. So again, just making a very thoughtful triangulation of the data points that you have in a simple way, and managing the personas of managers is a very thoughtful segment, was how we did it.
And Rodney, you spend a lot of time looking at surveys and stories about employees and their engagement. So at a time where we're trying to maximize the talent and retain it, how are companies that are successful getting that information out to employees to say, hey, you stay with us, we're going to take care of you?
Yeah, well, first of all, I didn't say what I do. So, Rodney Bolden, I am head of industry engagement and learning for Morgan Stanley at Work. I do thought leadership research on workplace benefits, and I also host our workplace benefit podcast, Invested at Work. But to answer your question, what we're seeing is that companies that are performing well with the bottom line, but also with their employees, are creating that culture of ownership, where it's either through equity compensation or employee stock purchase plans. They are helping employees to understand what you're doing in your day-to-day not only has a benefit to the company, but has a benefit to you because you are a shareholder. And it's important because you're right. Today, Gallup has termed the current period in employee experience as the Great Detachment, because employees are less engaged than they've been since 2014. Less than 1 in 4 employees feel that someone cares about them at work as a person. Less than 1 in 4 feel that someone respects them at work. And less than 1 in 4 feel that someone is invested in their career development. So you don't care about me, you don't respect me, you're not invested in my career development. That is a recipe for disaster and not retaining talent. And you heard the impact of losing people.
And it brings up from an earlier presentation the word connection, right? Mm-hmm. Connection to the mission of the company, being a part of that. I think that does make someone feel invested in it. You're investing in me, I'm investing in you. I would like to bring up, you mentioned the political climate, and we did talk about this on our prep call, that there is less of an emphasis on DEI and using that term, but employees want to be seen. They want to feel like they belong to a company. So how can a business, an employer, address that in this climate?
It's important because Randstad and their Global Work Monitor, which they've been doing for 23 years, over 80% of employees said that they want to work for a company where they feel a sense of community. And 64% said they've left a company where they don't feel that they belong. So it is important for employers to consider, even if you're pulling back on the word and the terminology, to stay committed to addressing the needs of the differentiated demographics in the workforce. Otherwise, you're going to have a retention problem. And
I'd love to hear from you guys too.
Yeah, I think that kind of combining a couple things that Rodney was just saying. One is, so we have a company, Copeland, to carve up from a purchase we made of Emerson. So thinking about the AC and the things, especially in big buildings, like that's probably powered by them. They actually launched, and we launched with them, an extension of my program. It's a shared ownership program. It's one of the largest that we know of in the country. 18,000 employees are now our shareholders in the company, and their engagement level went from the bottom quartile to like the over 90%. And so like they've seen the impact very quickly about in creating that shareholder or that ownership mindset across their employees. And I also think that ties very much into then driving belonging. And so I think that what we often recommend to our companies is to make sure that even if they're changing words, even if they're changing language, that they're still doing things to show that they care. Are you engaging with your communities? Are you creating spaces and opportunities for your employees to still convene and share? We at Blackstone, we even have like our employee resource groups are members of that community, but also allies of that group. So how are you still communicating that you're staying true to the values that you communicated, even if the language may be shifting?
Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll say, just to stay on the line of the most important part, which is the manager, is, as you continue to think about the language that is being evolved, I think the values stay constant. The metrics that you assess on a regular basis, and whether that's an inclusion index, has to be done more frequently. I think that any programs that, you deliver to, enable managers to develop them, the things that really measure belonging, you need to sort of double click into it. I think companies are doing that, but I think we just need to stay the course in this environment.
And we are kind of talking about some publicly traded companies and smaller portfolio companies.
Right.
But I think that goes the same with nonprofits and other community programs. I would imagine being able to get that information out, especially to the residents of the community, to know that there is an employer right there.
Correct.
So, oh, did you want to add something?
No,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. To let the communities that you serve feel seen and feel that they are represented within your not-for-profit organization really goes a long way in what we see in data.
Do you ever find any companies or organizations that say, "No, we don't want to tell you what we're doing"? It sounds like bad business to me, but
I have not personally seen that they don't want to tell what they're doing. They may tell it differently than they did a year ago.
Right. And I think, a lot of companies make commitments, and I think that it's how they report it that is going to evolve eventually. But, whether it's an investment internally on inclusion or externally in the communities, I think that, the shareholders, the stakeholders will still demand to see some level of transparency. So some will pull back, but some, it's important to keep sharing. Absolutely.
And to your point,
Yeah.
pay equity, we still hear that
Right.
out there, even in this environment. We still hear companies, because it's being demanded by underserved people within their organizations, especially women.
yeah. So we have a couple of minutes, and we've been asked to do the ask and give, of course. And I never asked you to prepare something. So I'm putting you on the spot, and I'm going to start down with you.
Great. I've been preparing all day for this, so I'm ready.
Excellent.
We didn't talk about it, you're right, but I knew, I was like, wait a minute, we have to have something ready.
Yeah.
So, one of the things, it goes off the point about community-based organizations. I come from that world, and so I knew what I wanted to do at Blackstone was to leverage those connections. We bring together our community-based organization, our talent providers, with our portfolio companies on a regular basis to hear what's going on. And so my recommendation, my ask of you all is to, as HR practitioners, get to know your local communities. There's so much amazing talent in those communities, and we created a framework for our companies to also think through how do you ask the right questions to make sure that you are matched with that you're building the right talent to then come into your organization. My give to all of you is, I don't think I have all the answers by any stretch of the imagination, but for 70 companies to be working with me, I see a lot. I see a very diverse, and from different industries. I offer to you time, my playbook, my framework, the things that I've been able to put together with my team that have seemed to work and work well. So that is my offer to you. Also want to mention the sun did come out. You never talked about that.
It was almost exactly when he said it was.
Yeah, just want to make sure that I'm giving that to you as well.
All right, so quickly, my give is, I live in Dallas, so, if you happen to, pass by Dallas, reach out. I'd love to give time to sort of share the experiences I've had over the last couple of years and what I'm focusing now on in my new season. I would say my ask is still, again, in the same thought through the people managers as the anchor to really, truly solve it. And we used to, one of the things we did at JP was to recognize outstanding managers. And Kathleen's sort of metric where she talked about, or showed just Besson's, 70% of managers or employees haven't been recognized, and it showed a little bit of our lower empathy in the organization. I think the manager recognition as an anchor is a really important thing to consider. Let's socially recognize effective managers, great managers, and be very intentional about it. That we may ask for you in any organizations that you're in.
So my ask is, as you're conducting your human capital surveys, disaggregate the data by different demographics in the workforce, because sometimes large numbers can hide certain cracks within your workforce depending on a particular demographic. So whether it's by race, ethnicity, gender, geography, level within the organization, every demographic, you want to make sure you're disaggregating that data. So that's my ask. My give is, I do a lot of research. I'm more than happy to connect with you and talk about some of the workplace research and some of the things that we find. Just connect with me on LinkedIn.
Okay, and my give is, I want you to go to WorkingNation.com. There's a story on our front page. It's about Chicago and what the employers are doing here. We highlight skills for Chicagoland future, discover what they have done with that call center. And Friedman Seating is another one that has worked within this ecosystem here to build jobs on the south and west side. My ask is that you don't keep what you're doing a secret. Find ways to share that in your community because you are helping people. And you know, we stress this very much. You're helping people. If they can see what you're doing in your company for one person, that could inspire them. And I will leave you with my thanks because I am a Chicago native. I live in LA now. I started at WBBM Radio, News 78, when I was 20, answering a telephone. And I had an employer who invested in me and my talent, even when I screwed up like the first time he did. But he invested in me, and now, many decades later, I've been able to thrive, and I'm a star. I don't have a college degree. So there are stories out there. Share them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.